best argument for capitalism and why it is wrong. Higher growth under capitalism than under any other system will long-term benefit everyone. This argument is the most effective for proponents of capitalism, but it too is unsupported by evidence and theoretically deficient. Why is this the best argument they have? It is the most effective argument for the proponents of capitalism because it does not rest on subjective moralizing as most of their arguments do. For example, those who make more deserve it. Those who own a lot of land and capital deserve it, and therefore it should not be taken from them. There are also arguments resting on the concept of there is no alternative. However, since knowledge of history, in particular that of the Soviet Union, brings this argument to its knees, it is weak and depends on the ignorance of the target. This argument is typically stated somewhat differently. Innovation, or something of that sort, is usually substituted for higher growth because higher growth is empirically testable. This is also the underlying argument behind statements like capitalism has lifted however many people out of poverty. These reformulations are not fundamentally any different, and if the underlying argument can be empirically disproven or found to be logically deficient, they all crumble as well. Consider the evidence from the World Bank data. This graph shows normalized GDP per capita. Of course, a graph showing all the countries would be far too cluttered to see anything of value. Here, the extremes are plotted with the Republic of Korea showing the highest GDP per capita growth over the past 60 years, while the Democratic Republic of the Congo shows the lowest growth. India, here in the center, is fairly representative of global capitalism as a whole. India has slightly outperformed the median country, and therefore shows roughly where the average country would fall. Notably, the United States has had lower GDP per capita growth over the last 60 years than India. Of course, what's interesting here is how capitalism compares to socialism. If we look at Cuba's line, it has equivalent growth to India, though the data does not go as far back. This is quite remarkable given that Cuba is an isolated island and faces hostility from the global superpower nearby. China, of course, is quite exemplary, and while China's growth does not completely put to rest arguments about capitalism, it's quite clear that pure free markets is not the best way to escape from poverty. It is also interesting to look at the real-world experiments that have occurred in history. These experiments are quite telling because they show us precisely what happens when a country goes from capitalism to socialism, or vice versa. In the case of the Soviet Union, its fall saw an economic collapse, while on the contrary, when central planning was first adopted, there was massive growth. Here we can see the GDP growth by sector at the start of the planned economy period, 1928 to 1940, in the USSR. On the contrary, we can see the decline in all the main industries in Russia when capitalism was introduced. It is also notable that it is possible to do significantly better than the Soviet Union. Computers and the internet are new technologies which fundamentally improve central planning to a degree which is hard to overstate. Additionally, avoiding cheap food populism and other such related mistakes would also improve economic performance. To clarify, underestimating the price of food will lead to the appearance of shortages even when in reality there is an abundance. Let us examine the logical foundations of this argument. Since the empirical evidence clearly does not support this capitalist argument, the foundation must be ideological belief that no system can be better than capitalism. It is simple to disprove this belief as well. Consider secrecy between firms. This can frequently create inefficiencies and overproduction. Patents prevent competing firms from using clearly best methods frequently. More fundamentally, the very fact that there is profit means that labor is being undervalued and this will prevent firms from adopting technologies to increase productivity. As a modern example, consider Amazon's cashierless stores, which are a massive labor-saving technology that has a rather slow rollout because labor is systematically undervalued. In conclusion, the strongest argument against socialists and for capitalism is that everyone will be long-term better off under the higher growth of capitalism. This argument is both empirically false and logically without foundation.